Hello, my name's Stephen Creech, and I'd like to introduce a dear friend of mine, Tim Compton. Tim Compton received a double major in art education and ceramics from Ball State University. He has since focused on community engagement and ceramic education through his various roles at the Indianapolis Arts Center. His work focuses primarily on decorative and functional pots that he finishes in the wood kiln. And I'm pleased to welcome Tim Compton.
Thanks, Stephen. Hi guys, welcome to the Indianapolis Arts Center. Today what we're doing is we are finishing handmade pots that are going to be fired entirely with wood. The way the process starts is we roll back the lid, we load in about 250 to 300 pots depending on size, and then we roll that back. We have a team that comes in at about 5, 6 in the morning depending on how much they hit snooze, and they start a small fire down at the bottom. Eventually they add enough wood that fire builds and builds. Once they hit about 1,000 degrees, they'll move up to the top firebox and keep stoking in larger pieces of wood. What they'll eventually get to is about 2,300 degrees. At that top temperature, the kiln is glowing red hot, everything's glowing inside, and we'll actually have a 4-foot flame shooting out the top of the chimney. Now what happens at that top temperature is the ash, same ash as your bonfire at home, actually flies through the kiln, lands on the pots, and creates the glassy surface. I have a pot here that was in the last firing, and you can see not only do we get that glassy surface on the piece, but we also get a variated color on the surface of the piece. And that's really a record of the firing. If you want, you can poke your head in and you can take a look inside the kiln. You can see the fire moving past the pots, and we do actually try and place the pots so that we can control where that flame is going and really start to control sort of the surface of the piece. The other thing that you might see in there is some cone-shaped items. Those tell us exactly what temperature the pots are inside the kiln. We can track the temperature of the air, but it takes a little while for heat to soak into ceramics. So it's really important that those bend at a very specific temperature, and that tells us when the kiln is done. Once it's all done, we button it up. We'll wait about 2 or 3 days to let it cool, and then we'll unload it, and it's like Christmas. If you want, you can feel free to grab a bite to eat or wander around the studio. We do have an open studio going on. You can also ask people any questions. If they don't know, ask the person next to them until you get the answer you need. This is the way that we introduce people to the wood firing at the Indianapolis Arts Center. We have that shtick available for all of our volunteers so that they can introduce any individual, whether they're ceramic knowledgeable or whether they're just a casual walker by coming off of the trail. We're in a situation that is pretty aptly located to engage a wide variety of people and introduce them to the ceramic arts. Real quickly, I want to share about the Indianapolis Arts Center. It was founded in 1934 as a public works project. Our current building was designed by Michael Graves, and it has 11 studios. We offer everything from ceramics to sculpture, woodworking, glass blowing, drawing, painting, and even textile arts and sewing. And we serve an estimated 250,000 people throughout our various programs annually. The Arts Park, where our wood kiln is located, is directly behind the Arts Center. It was created in 2005, and it's bordered by the White River, is directly behind us, and we have the Monon biking and walking trail that is just at the edge of the park as well, and that's the main thoroughfare in and out of Indianapolis by walking or biking. The whole space is free and open to the public, and it's being centrally located inside this area that really makes our wood kiln a great opportunity to engage everybody, not just ceramics individuals, but the general public as well with our firings. I'm going to talk a little bit today about some of the community that we engage and how we made our firing space to be the optimal opportunity for people to be engaged and inspired about the ceramic arts. So who is that community? Our community breaks out into a couple of different areas. We have our volunteers and students. Those are the most dedicated individuals. Those include people that are taking a class that might be focused entirely on wood firing. They will typically bring their friends and family, so people that are invested because they know someone that's invested. And then we also have sort of the art-associated community. People that might have work in the kiln or other ceramic schools, things of that nature. Because of our unique location, we also get a couple of different type of people that come to our firing events. We are an event space, so we host weddings and other things of that nature. And we do get quite a few of them that come and check out the kiln. We actually position our firings so that they're happening at the same time as a wedding. We do try to be quiet and courteous during the actual, does anyone object? That's a really important time not to be stoking. But those event attendees do wander down and they're curious. We have actually gone so far as even to hosting, we had a fashion show that was happening at the Art Center. And at one point we had a bunch of models in high heels poking in and looking around the kiln. So our location is a pretty unique opportunity to introduce people to the ceramic arts. The other thing is that we get, the casual passerby. Being a public park, we do get a lot of dog walkers, and we welcome our four-legged friends as much as our two-legged friends to the wood firing. What I tried to show here at the bottom of the page is sort of a breakout of how those different webs of people kind of interconnect. We do have a lot of those volunteers that bring a lot of people to our wood firing, and that really helps us to build that community. The little bit about our train kiln, ours is it's called a train because it looks like a choo-choo. And our original design was from Judith Duff. It's a really efficient use of fuel. It allows us to do a 24-hour firing, which is really great because we can start the kiln early in the morning, and then we can finish the kiln early the next morning. And that means that sort of that prime time, the real shock and awe that's happening at the firing, is right about 7 p.m. to 10 p.m. So it makes for a great party. What I'm going to do today is I'm going to kind of break down the 3 phases that we did in creating a community-centric space. Those 3 phases are infrastructure, promotion, and execution. It's important that we got those done in that order so that we can make sure that everything would go off without a hitch. For us, we define infrastructure as any permanent fixture or practices that are vital to ensuring the successful artwork and experiences. It's important to ensure both the artwork and the experience. It can be a great time, but if the artwork doesn't come out well, you're not going to be able to repeat that and get the same community engagement. Some examples of our infrastructure are our kiln space, our shelter, our wood, and the furniture, both the furniture inside the kiln, the posts and shelves, as well as the furniture outside the kiln. We do try to make sure that we have benches and seating space available for the casual passerby that wants to sit down and stay for a while. So getting the infrastructure set, we did some early testing. Some of the things that we learned is our kiln was originally just sitting out in the elements. We didn't have a structure over it. And that really prevented us from being able to ensure a good wood source of clean, dry wood that was ready to be burned. And it made it so that it was really not a great firing experience, especially if we had bad weather. Excuse me. So you can see in the picture here, we actually built a shelter over it. And we built a shelter that was large enough for us to cover the wood, as well as the kiln, as well as the people that would be firing. So no matter what the weather's doing, we had a great environment. We also did go into doing some kiln modifications. So we recast the firebox arch that allows us to stoke larger pieces of wood into the kiln. And that means that we can spread out some of those stokes. That gives us more time to talk to people in between stoking. So really all of our kiln modifications were to make the firing go seamlessly so that we didn't have to focus all of our attention on the firing. We could focus our attention on the people that were coming by. We added a backstop onto the firebox. This was because we would occasionally have celebrity stokings, people that would come by. And because it's so hot, they would stand back and launch the piece as hard as they could. And very quickly, we found that we were bellying out the back of the firebox. So we did put some reinforcement back there. We also expanded the side stoking holes, again, so that we could put in larger pieces of wood and spread out that process. And we extended the chimney. Our wood source is Indiana hardwoods, and they create a really heavy, dense ash. The Judith Duff design was originally for pine only, and it's a light, fluffy ash. And what we were running into is we couldn't pull enough air through that coal bed to really drive that down. And so extending that chimney made our coal bed burn down very easily. We can just open the dampers a little bit, and it just runs smooth. So all of that is to make sure that the firing goes great. We also did some extra add-ons. We have a fire pit that is really just a small trash can, easy to move around, but it creates warmth, especially in some of our colder firings in early spring and late fall. We built a small pizza oven. I call this a fast fire model, and I always tell people it's the most important kiln that we have. This pizza oven is really just a hollow cube with the face pulled off of it and a shelf slid in there. The fire underneath heats up the stone that cooks the crust, and the flame coming over top and out the front cooks the topping. So it does get regular use on every firing. I also talked about some of the seating that we provide. You can see a picture there in the left-hand side, as well as tables for food. We'll get to food. That's the important part. And we have additional kilns out there. We do have a small soda kiln that we often fire at the same time as the wood kiln. And it's about giving people more than just one thing to see. If they want to hang out and learn about the process, there's a little bit of everything going on. Once we got the infrastructure all set, it was about promoting the work and the experience to the general public. Some of the ways that we went about that is we do offer kiln work or kiln space for work. So especially for the local ceramics community, that was a great way to pull in other groups of people, and they would often bring, their friends and family to the experience. We also pair with events. I talked about the weddings and the other events. We also do artistic events. So we'll do a steamroll press with our printmaking studio, and if we can position that on the same day, or in one of the videos, you'll actually see them cleaning up an iron pour that was happening with our sculpture students. And so those, we either butt end those two events, or we have them happening simultaneously to really draw as big a crowd as possible. Our volunteers spread word of mouth. That's obviously one of the most trustworthy ways to build a community of people. We use social media, just like everyone else, but really what we find with social media is it's great to remind people the day of. If we're posting, I've been out at the wood kiln for 5 hours, that reminds people, I need to swing by the wood kiln later tonight. So it's great for that. And then finally, it's really important to share the work that's coming out of that kiln. So student and teacher work, having that on display. And actually, this picture is by Sharon Gardner, and it's down in the ICANN booth down in the resource hall. So make sure you swing by and check that out. The day of, it's execution time. You can do all the setup you want, but if you don't execute on the day, it's not going to go smoothly. We define execution as controlling the variables leading up to, during, and after the event to ensure it's perceived by all to be a success. Some of the things that we do for execution are we have a volunteer sign-up that includes who's bringing what food. It's important that we have all of those volunteers organized, prepared, and know kind of where our gaps are going to be. We do have a firing schedule that's pretty laid out by hour, so that people know exactly where the kiln's supposed to be at. And again, so they're not having to worry about the firing. Always the trickiest thing is tracking the weather. You can't predict that, unfortunately. We have moved 1 or 2 firings to try and ensure that we're not in the middle of a rainstorm. But for the most part, we position our firings so that they happen at sort of optimal times of year. Late spring, early fall. We do a summer firing, which is usually quite warm. Now, I did want to show you a couple of videos to give you a feel about kind of what the experience is around our wood kiln. These are stop motion videos, so they're going to go rather quickly. So don't worry, you're not going to have to watch 24 hours of wood firing today. The first one is going to be the loading process. You'll notice there's probably about 10 to 15 people that are helping with that. And if you watch over in the left-hand corner, you'll also see the cleanup of the iron pour. So that's the loading process that typically happens about a day or two before the firing. We found that spacing that out really makes it a little bit less stressful for everybody involved and ensures that we can have all of our volunteers ready for the day of the firing. The next video is actually taken during one of our most recent firings in the wintertime. This is a view from the end of the kiln where we're stoking the wood. You'll see kind of the people running by and all that kind of stuff. So you can see there's quite a few different people walking past there. The last video is a little bit longer. than those two short ones. And this is from sort of an aerial view of the kiln area. You can actually see to the left the bonfire pit and the benches around that. We do roast s'mores, marshmallows every single firing, so that's also important. And we've got the food table out there. Also to the upper left, you can actually see the entrance. That's one of the main entrances into the art center. So as people are walking to and from their cars, they see the flame coming off the kiln. They see that glowing, and that makes them curious. So we do get a lot of people. This firing actually took place during our student show opening. So we had about 500 people come through that night that we interacted with in sort of the evening time. One of the things you'll notice is that the community kind of ebbs and flows. It's not slam-packed with people constantly the entire time, and that really helps us to have individual conversations with everyone. This video ends at about 11:30 at night, so by the time we're getting towards those later hours of the firing, the crowd does start to dwindle a little bit. So the firing schedule, as I mentioned before, is 24 hours. We do shifts of 2 people. We try to never leave anyone on their own. Those partnerships are usually a more experienced wood fire person that is kind of the lead on that time, and maybe a newer person to the experience. We do 3 to 4 hour shifts so that people don't get burnt out, pun intended. And we try to provide people an idea of what needs to be done in between those shifts. So they're adding wood every 5 minutes, but there is other tasks that need to be done: stacking wood, splitting wood, and so forth. I'd be remiss if I didn't mention all of those volunteers and kind of break out their different roles. We do have the regular volunteers. We have a group of people that are very dedicated to the process, and they are there pretty much every wood firing, sharing what they know about it. We have the foodies that are there to cook and make sure that we are all well fed. I tend to eat best at a wood firing. And then we have the newbies. The newbies are great for that environment because when we have the casual passerby, they might be too hesitant to actually ask the questions. But the newbies are the ones that are rapid firing question after question after question. And they really can drive the conversation around the wood count a lot. Then we just have those just for fun visitors, the people that are coming to be social because they have a friend that is hanging out by the wood fire that night. And they do add a lot of vibrancy to the experience. I've mentioned food several times, and I really can't mention it enough. That pizza oven fuels us as we go through that process. It's a community collaboration. So on the right here, you can see one of our younger wood firing experiences with Holly Jones, who's one of our volunteers that actually has done culinary training and in bread making. And so she is our designated pizza crust artist. And they worked together and made that pizza based on the toppings that were brought by all the different people. It's a real low pressure situation. And then the other thing that we always make sure we have on hand is the drink cooler. It's important to keep people hydrated. They don't realize how dehydrated they're getting around the kiln. So the event itself, that wood fire experience, is all of the shock and awe, but it's really important to follow it up with sort of the learning experience, that unloading. And we do try to make our unloading as big of an event as we can as well. It's our opportunity to really expose people to what those pots come out looking like and why we're all so invested in this experience. One of the things that we've found is that it's really important to be able to tell people the unloading time the day of the firing. They need to know when they should come back to see it all. And with that note, we also try to give them a very specific time. If we say we're unloading the kiln at 6:30, not a single pot comes out until 6:30, no matter how much protesting we get. We stick to that unload time so that people know that if they show up at 6:30, they're going to get to see every single pot that comes out of the kiln. If they show up late, that's on them. We do start every unloading also with the cleanup process. We found that holding on to those pots and making them wait gets us a lot more cleanup work. But it's also really important for everybody to see that it takes a community to keep that entire space up and running and viable. In the image here, you can see that we've actually basically unloaded the kiln in a way where we kind of took it as it was stacked in the kiln and laid it out. So closer to the bottom of the page would actually be the floor of the kiln. Further back into the distance would be the top of the kiln, and then closer to the firebox and closer to the chimney. That really helps students to see where are the more action, where are the quieter spots of the kiln, and better prepare for sort of their next firing. We do try to reflect both on the work that comes out of it and on the experience as a whole. We find that it's really helpful for us to talk about what went well, what went wrong, what we can do better, where the expectations were, and how we can better manage those expectations. In this image, you can see some students looking at a piece, and we actually have our intern on the left there, Sierra, that was taking notes on a lot of the work that came out, and then also we talked and sort of debriefed after that firing. I did want to give a special thanks and a shout out to the Indianapolis Arts Center, my wife Emily, who let me sit by the kiln for extended periods of time, Paul Hayes, and all the volunteers who helped make the firing such a great experience. Thanks. We do have a little bit of extra time. If anybody has any questions, we can take them at the microphone, or I can certainly talk to people after. Thanks. Anyone? Yeah, we got a question here at the microphone.
How often do you usually get the fire?
Great question. We fire typically about 5 times a year. We find that allows us to kind of maintain our wood source the most. That's actually what dictates the pace of that. And then also student work when that's available. We have had occasionally both IUPUI's Heron School of Art came and did a wood firing that we added an extra one in for. And we have also had students that have wanted to do their own wood firing or sort of host their own wood firing. We never fire only one person's work in the kiln, but we do let them do primarily their work, and so we'll drop those in occasionally, but typically 5.
One more, if I may.
Sure.
How much wood would go in one firing, if you can estimate it?
I can never remember the difference between a rick and a cord. Whichever one is bigger, it's 2 feet deep by about 4 feet tall and 8 feet long. We'll burn that about 4 times over. So we'll burn 4 of those in one wood firing. So it is quite a large amount of wood. Most of our wood actually comes from students and teachers that are having trees taken down on their property and things like that. And we do a log splitting day where we'll split almost all the wood for an entire year.
Thank you.
Yep.
So much.
Thanks for sharing. A couple questions about how to, about kind of getting volunteers to contribute, not equitably. I'll just ask the questions. First, how do you make sure people stay safe?
Great question.
And then kind of follow up to that, a lot of people want to be there, but they don't feel safe. So how can you get people comfortable, putting wood into, a firebox at Cone 10?
Yeah, those are both great questions. The questions are, how do you ensure that people are safe? And then how do you help people feel safe in that process? And so our volunteers, like I talked about, the regulars, and then we do have particular individuals that have done upwards of 10 to 20 firings in this kiln. We have staff that are also there at that time. So there's always a staff member that is sort of the responsible party at the kiln. They know that they're the responsible party and that it's on them if anything were to happen. One of the things that we also always provide is gloves, and we have a visor that always sits next to the firebox. So as that temperature increases, anybody that's stoking typically wears the visor, and then the gloves that we have are actually long welding gloves. So even if somebody's coming off the trail and they've been running and they're wearing, just a tank top and shorts, we try to provide them enough safety equipment that they can actually add a stoke in. The earlier temperatures are great for people to add material at that time because it's not quite as hot in there. We have had the occasional burn around there, and so we have a first aid kit that's on hand at all times as well. Excuse me. But a really important thing is sort of that seating and bonfire area that's out front of the kiln. It's really great for people to feel invited to just come and sit down and hang out by the bonfire. and they can watch from afar. So there is no pressure for them to come up and actually put something in. But we typically find that most people are curious enough and that a spy hole is safe enough. That they'll come up and the curious mind wants to kind of look inside. The other thing that really impresses people all the time is when you grab a soft brick by one end and they know that it's 2300 degrees on the other end, that really starts to force them to kind of ask questions about how is that even physically possible. And when you answer all of those questions, that really calms a lot of nerves. Great questions.
All right, my question's about glazes. It did appear that some of the pots and stuff were glazed, and I was wondering if you had like in-shop glazes, or if you like ordered in glazes, or like if you had like your students make their own.
Yeah. That's a great question. Oftentimes students will make their own glazes when they're in the wood firing class, and they're really focusing on learning that experience. We do have shop glazes available to people as well, and we try to pinpoint the ones that are going to be the most successful. Shinos, Tenmokus, things like that. We do encourage everyone to put in at least one piece that's raw on the outside of the pot, but we do also always recommend that they glaze the inside for functionality. Most of what's going in here is functional pots. We do occasionally fire sculpture as well, but really what we found is that to get students invested and to really gather up the volunteers that we need and get them excited about the process, they have to get out pots that they like. So if that means that they're glazing the entire piece in a Tenmoku because they really love the way that it collects ash and runs down the side of a pot, then that's what they put in there. We do try to introduce them to that rougher surface, but we want them to get pots that they like, and so that they'll come back and want to engage again. Great questions.
I'm curious about the funding for this and the partnership with Indianapolis and how that all went down. I'm really curious about it being in such a public place. And I'm assuming your art center, maybe you talked about this, but I'm assuming your art center is connected with the city, and
Yeah.
how is that all?
Yeah, so a little bit about sort of the makeup of it is the Indianapolis Art Center is a 501c3 nonprofit. And so we are a fairly large school, but we're funded through generous donations from both the Glick family in Indianapolis and a couple other of major donors. We offer outreach and other programs that help to keep us at that 501c3 status. As the city of Indianapolis, we actually are working to turn and engage that more. The neighborhood that we're located in, Broad Ripple, has really seen a boom recently, both in businesses as well as housing. And so it's become one of the central neighborhoods for Indianapolis, one of the really engaging neighborhoods. And so we found that to be an asset for us as an organization to turn outwards to the community and try to draw as many people in as possible. Honestly, the way that we engage the city the most is through face-to-face interactions. I was just talking with Stephen up here before we started the lecture about how great of a community around ceramics we have in Indianapolis. There was an event for First Friday a couple weeks back where we had probably 75 different ceramic artists from all the different major programs in the city that went to one gallery and hung out together for a good chunk of the evening. So we're really fortunate that we do have a great ceramics community in Indianapolis, and that's helped us to engage at a larger level. The wood firing itself is part of the Indianapolis Art Center and the school and what they provide. All right, thanks guys, I appreciate it.